Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, hopefully soon to be the PlayStation 5, but still, hopefully, to be playing World of Warships Legends when it gets here, whenever that is. But that's all really outside of the point. Today we're here to look at Azuma, the Tier 7 premium Japanese cruiser. We'll be talking about her history, my thoughts on the ship, commanders, the stats, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay like usual. If you do want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes down in the description. And with all that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. The Azuma is yet another ship that never actually exists, but among the fleet of paper ships we have, actually there is a considerable amount of information on this ship. Why? Because among boat enthusiasts, the Yamato gets considerable interest, and this cruiser is essentially like the original PlayStation Slim of that battleship. The B-64 and B-65 cruiser, super cruiser, or battle cruiser project were expected to be only about 4% shorter in length than the Yamato, though her beam may have been about 30% thinner. So when looking at this ship in port, your eyes do not deceive you. She is quite large. Wargaming's interpretation of this ship actually shows considerably more effort put into this design than would be historically necessary, because this went through several different iterations, some of which looked very much like a mini Yamato. Now, how historically accurate it is to any one design, I really can't put a finger on that for sure, because the B-65 cruiser project spanned such a long period of time and was ultimately never built. So there are several different interpretations of what this would look like based on when you might want to depict that design. In any case, the actual idea of this ship is quite a bit older than any particular design of this ship, and was very much fundamental to the general structure of the Japanese fleet, going all the way back to the lessons learned by the Russo-Japanese War. Now, that war, up until World War II, was the only major naval engagement Japan had participated in against a major Western power. And the Japanese came up with the 8-8 program after that, where they wanted to maintain a fleet of 8 modern battleships and 8 armored cruisers. As time advanced, the armored cruiser concept would give way to the battle cruiser. And though the ships are classified as battleships in World of Warships, this is exactly the role that the Kongo and Fuso class battle cruisers were intended to fill, and the original purpose of the Amagi class battlecruisers. Like I said in my Ashitaka review though, none of the Amagi class battlecruisers were ultimately finished as battlecruisers, with the ships cancelled and scrapped or converted to an aircraft carrier in the case of the Akagi after the signing of the Washington Naval Treaty. This design would be the next step forward for the Japanese Navy following their exit from the Naval Treaty System. Now, to talk briefly on Wargaming's label here, Yasen Butai Leader, the general purpose of battlecruisers in Japanese doctrine, which is why I might refer to this as a battlecruiser rather than a supercruiser, was to lead forces in night attacks designed to strip away enemy battle fleets' screening forces and make way for the battleships to finish off the enemy fleet in one decisive engagement, preferably the next morning. This use wasn't actually all that different from how the Germans and British intended to use their battle cruisers, at least when they weren't out protecting the far-flung areas of the Empire, or strangely, using their capital ships to engage in surface raiding. In any case, Project 64 was originally designed with 310mm guns that you see here, which is 12.2 inches in the more common naval measurement system. Upon learning of the Americans' design of the Alaska, an option of this ship with 6 14-inch guns, yes, 14-inch guns on what is ostensibly a cruiser, were considered. Again, another reason to call this a battlecruiser. But it was estimated that the 12-inch gun version of the ship would weigh in at around 32,000 tons, with the 14-inch version pushing 40,000 tons. Now, for comparison purposes, the standard displacement for a South Dakota class battleship was only 35,000 tons, though at full load she was quite a bit heavier. But in any case, this was a very big ship. The project kicked off in 1936, potentially, or 1939, depending on which version you're looking at, or in the case of the game listed as 1941, because that's about when Japan learned about the existence of the Alaska class cruisers, again cruisers in quotes, with the original intent being that they would build 6 of these cruisers. Following the defeat at Midway in 1942, the number ordered was cut to just 2, though the increasingly dire realities of the Japanese war effort would mean both of these ships would be placed on hold, never laid down, much less completed. As far as the Azuma in-game, she has a pretty decent list of strengths and weaknesses, and they break down more or less like this, at least as far as I see them. The Azuma is pretty consistent as a damage dealer, though the Azuma does have the best armor penetrating alpha of any cruiser at the tier. You'll find yourself more likely to be shooting the excellent Japanese HE shells, which are not exactly guaranteed, but are pretty close to, always going to do a pretty decent chunk of damage. Though you have a good fire chance per shell, you're actually not a really great fire starter and will be relying significantly on the HE penetration damage to slowly work up a decent amount of damage. In spite of the colossal size of this ship, it actually enjoys a reasonably good concealment and actually has a decent speed. She has pretty good gun angles forward and even better gun angles, though not quite auto bounce angles, when shooting backwards over her shoulder. She also has a pretty huge hit point pool, which will help her stay in the game a little bit longer. You actually come by default with 3 heals rather than 2, and your entire hull of this ship is covered in enough armor to bounce 15-inch shells. On the other hand, other than the lucky glancing shot off of a turret, I'm not actually sure if there's any part of this armor scheme that can hold up to being hit by a 16-inch shell at pretty much any range. The size of the ship is absolutely enormous, which plays into her being easier to actually hit, and your maneuverability is more similar to a battleship than it is to a cruiser, so you can't exactly get out of the way. It's also worth mentioning that if you're working out how to deal with the Azuma most effectively with guns that can't reliably penetrate the hull of this ship, as Tikana once said, just shoot HE. This ship takes a ton of HE damage, a fact that I became rather suddenly and tragically aware of when I was confronted with the King George, which punched me in the face for, I think, around 12,000 damage. Some people are not going to enjoy the gun performance here since she's not particularly accurate. She has really long reloads, and her turret traverse, particularly with main battery mod, is just the stuff of nightmares. Some people will not like being compelled to shoot HE because the ship's AP performance is kind of disappointing, especially at ranges where you're intended to play this ship at. Compared to other cruisers, not that you're really a cruiser, but you're definitely taking up a cruiser slot, the Azuma probably has the lowest maximum damage potential, lacks the ability to really push objectives due to her overall size, maneuverability, and lack of gun tracking, and really offers her team very little in terms of vision, since she only comes with a plane and sonar, neither of which are likely to tell you too much based on the ranges where the Azuma is most comfortably played. And for all of these reasons, this cruiser is at a pretty considerable disadvantage versus destroyers, which introduces something of a weakness for your entire team. The Azuma is therefore probably best played at medium or longer ranges, where she's less likely to outturn her guns, which is surprisingly easy to do in this ship, and at those ranges she can rely on taking fewer hits, harassing mostly battleships, and punishing cruisers when the opportunity presents itself. When picking a commander for the ship, you'll find that you have a lot of choices that can help you play the ship in a lot of different ways. I'm not sure if this is more because the ship's sort of a hybrid battle cruiser, or because awkward ships tend to lend themselves to more creativity. In any case, if you believe this ship is intended for ranged harassment and opportunism, and there are good reasons to think that, then Yamamoto is probably your best choice. Without Yamamoto, having such large guns with such mediocre range tends to leave you with the impression that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. The improved accuracy is definitely helpful for putting out damage, and certainly when fighting at longer ranges. Yamamoto also has improved penetration because of his base trait and the very attractive looking punching through skill. In reality, I think it is likely to help you against a handful of other tier 7 cruisers. It probably actually isn't even necessary against tier 6 cruisers, and other than extra damage, the penetration benefits don't actually seem to help you defeat enemy armor as much as you would think, particularly against battleships. The other Japanese cruiser commander is Mikawa, and he has some really nice advantages too. Having the stealth base trait means that you can operate closer to your enemies, even if you don't want to dedicate any inspirations to it. Thanks to Ingenious, you will also probably end up with the best turret rotation that you can hope for in this ship. He also has more abilities available to help improve the survivability of your ship and equipment, including the aforementioned Ingenious. Unfortunately, this limits your opportunities to increase your range to just the 4th slot equipment choice and a Kuznetsov inspiration. The trade-off between our cruiser captains here is really how close do you want to be to the action. The further you are away, naturally, the more survivable the ship tends to be. But the closer you are to objectives, the more likely you're actually doing something useful. And if you're not going to choose one of those two, then you're probably going to be doing some creative thinking. And it should be stated that you will be wasting some opportunities here, but since Azuma is a cruiser in name only, there is actually some sense to doing this. If you want to choose a non-traditional path, Crisscross is a battleship ability that is going to help this ship, giving its really disappointing turret traverse a little extra boost, though not quite as much as you'll find on Ingenious with Mikawa. All of these commanders also have access to Will to Rebuild, which will improve the strength of your heal a bit, and if you're close enough to an ally, may heal your critically damaged ship. Takeo Takagi actually improves your heal automatically, which is nice because you'll have more heals than you would have in most cruisers. While you'll probably end up with the fastest recharge on your damage control with him, the reason you'd be choosing him is to try to get the dispersion of your shells down by taking marksman, with the natural caveat that this is going to make your rudder feel even more like a battleship than it already does. While not wildly useful, Heihachiro's base trait is something everyone can benefit from. Maximum concealment is the one true advantage that he has, though I think the Azuma benefits from this a lot less than other cruisers. Needless to say though, you'll walk away with a little extra speed, little extra fire chance, and nothing really special when you use him, just like any other base commander. And Kondo clearly has a base trait that does absolutely nothing for you since it only affects actual battleships, or at least as far as the game's concerned. But he also has a lot of tools that help you with your survivability, particularly when he is highly leveled. The size of this ship can be a real issue. There's a lot of real estate for people to land HE shells on you, so if you want to limit the number of fires that you can take on your ship, or you want to further improve the efficacy of your heal, he actually does offer you another workable survivability option. Though a 5 heal Azuma option is attractive, I should mention that the damage control on the Azuma is a cruiser damage control, so the reload is a lot faster than on a battleship, meaning that fires are a little bit less dangerous, and maybe you don't need to really worry about that quite so much. As we come to stats, we'll be talking about Azuma mostly against your average Tier 7 cruiser experience, because I'm not about to compare this ship to Odin, though you may guess why I might mention that particular ship before we begin. Starting out with survivability, the Azuma has 52,500 hit points right out of the box. This is a pretty huge chunk of life. It's actually 11,500 higher than average, and a mere 500 less than the least healthy battleship at the tier. This 13 to 305 millimeters of armor, though, looks like you have a pretty decent range, but I will warn you that this just means that you have the most heavily armored turrets at the tier. Most of your hull seems to be 27 millimeters, and your superstructure is 13, which is not ideal. The 22% torpedo reduction, though, is best at the tier for a cruiser. If we were to class it as a battleship, it's pretty close to the minimum protection that you could expect to see there. The Azuma comes in with 3x3, 310mm guns. They range out to a fairly average 15.8 kilometers. With that range just being 200 meters over average, the range does feel a bit short, or at the very least disappointing. Your guns take a long time to reload at 26 seconds, meaning most cruisers at this tier will put out 2 volleys for every 1 that you can unload. You'll need time-lapse photography to see that your turrets are actually rotating, because this 40 seconds is 13 seconds worse than average, and actually 33% worse than the next slowest turrets of any cruiser at this tier. Your shells do an impressive 4,500 damage with HE, and a 27% fire chance. Citadel hits with AP will inflict 8,150 damage. Considering the size of your main battery compared to other cruisers, it is no surprise that these are the largest alpha numbers that you will see for any Tier 7 cruiser right now. But I would caution against getting too excited about these numbers because you will have the worst HE damage per minute for any non-German cruiser and the worst AP damage per minute for any non-Italian cruiser. While that is true, that probably does sound a little worse than it actually is, because your larger shells do mean that you're more likely to cause damage with each shot, being able to overmatch lower level cruisers and being able to penetrate almost every bit of armor that you will face with HE. In any case, the Azuma's main battery performance has a lot more in common with battleships at the tier than it does with cruisers, which is why you will struggle against destroyers. Coming next to maneuverability, the Azuma is on the high side of average for speed, beating out the average cruiser by half a knot. The rest of these stats are pretty battleship-like, though. This turning circle is the same radius that you'll find on the Iowa, which is to say pretty wide even for a battleship, and the rudder shift is pretty similar to Vladivostok or Odin. While those battleships are the two fastest rudders at tier 7 right now, it means that the Azuma's rudder shift is easily the worst for a cruiser at this tier. But then surprisingly, we come to concealment. I guess you probably could guess we come to concealment next. But what I mean is that the numbers here are a little surprising. Your sea detectability is 200 meters better than the average for a cruiser, and obviously this is a lot better than any battleship could even hope to attain at this tier. This does give you some ability to sail closer to other ships than they might expect, and it makes it easier to disengage if things aren't going your way. Detectability from air is about average too, but you won't be surprised that when firing these big guns from smoke, your detectability is a lot worse than other cruisers, about 2.5 kilometers worse than average, though still more than 2 kilometers better than you'll find on the Odin. When we come to consumables, you do come with 3 different types of consumables, and there are presently no choices here. You do have a hydroacoustic search, or sonar, that ranges out to 3.1 kilometers for enemy torpedoes, 4.4 kilometers for enemy ships, reloads at 96 seconds, and has a 180-second recharge. This is basically exactly what you'll find on other Japanese cruisers at this tier. Your heal will help you recover 1/2 of 1% for 28 seconds and has a slightly shorter reload of 40 seconds, which is actually quite good. You do get 3 of these, and that is a plus even though this is your average cruiser heal, other than that fast reload. The Azuma is equipped with a fighter. It lasts for 6 minutes, just like every other cruiser, though it'll probably get shot down a lot sooner than that, and has a 3-minute recharge. You do get 3 of those, but the math should tell you that you're probably not going to use all 3 of them. And as we tick on towards a record in terms of overall review length, we're going to go ahead and jump into some gameplay. I'm going to be on Northern Waters, one of my absolute favorite maps in the game. Here you can see there are several legendary ships in this particular match. I have found that this is very common. And that may or may not be a motivation for you. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen so you can see exactly what I'm working with here. I will say, as you take a look at that, I would, under no stretch of the imagination, consider this if you were to be playing this particular ship. In this case, we're choosing this game, just like usual, because it probably offers a little bit more opportunity to talk about what the Azuma is good at and what she's maybe not so good at. In this case, with Haihachiro, we are not getting a whole lot out of our commander, so it's mostly the performance of the boat that you're going to actually be seeing here. Now we are moving out towards the east, and as we do that, obviously you can see we have a pretty comfortable buffer in terms of our spotting range versus our total artillery range. We do have a little bit extra range thanks to our slot 4 skill. Unfortunately, it's not really like all that much. We're getting about 300 extra meters there. One of the things that, if you do want to consider earning this ship, you'll need to be able to do is navigate the possibility of ending up in a lot of legendary ship games. Both of the existing legendary ships, at least the battleships, have 16-inch or larger guns. That is a problem. You're not particularly good at dealing with destroyers, and other than that, the only thing you can fight at legendary tier is the Alaska, which you actually do pretty well against, to be completely honest. I think it still has the upper hand, but I think you can perform well, particularly if the Alaska decides not to shoot HE at you. If it does, well, then it's probably not going to go so well. In any case, we're still trying to use these islands as best we can so that we can kind of like block who can actually see us. That Iowa is obviously burning. We've done about 19,000 damage to him, and that's, you know, pretty okay. It's not like most of his HP, but certainly a good chunk of what he has already lost. You can see, even as we're pushing up into this particular cap, we are taking a little bit of fire from somebody else. In this case, I am playing this a little bit more aggressively than maybe you should. You can see, in spite of our angle there, obviously we took a hit off the front quarter of our ship. I'm going to go ahead and pop that up in a little window so you can kind of guess where all those shots hit. This is why I think that there's really no armor on the side of the ship either. Essentially, we had a pretty good angle and couldn't even bounce that there. So, getting behind this island, we are once again trying to shield ourselves from being shot by Grosser Kurfürst. Fortunately, we take another shot straight through the front of the ship, and that has knocked us down below half of our life, which is pretty bad. I will say that we do know that the front of the ship is 27 millimeters, so we know that that 16-inch shell will go right through. So I don't really know exactly what it is that's on the side of the ship, but my guess is that it is also, it's not 30 millimeters, maybe it's 28, but my guess is that the hull is actually all 27. Now we're going to back off just a little bit. Now is not the time to be brave. We need to try to hold on for our team, continue to do damage, contribute, you know, at least a little bit. We land a nice hit on him for 7,400 damage. And as we start to navigate forward again, we switch over to AP. We're going to test out what are we going to get if we try to shoot this kind of shell. First of all, you should know that our dispersion isn't that great. In spite of that and a relatively decent aim, you can see we only managed to walk away with 6,100 damage. More often than not, I would say that you do better damage with HE than you will with AP. This ship is not one that scores a lot of citadels, even for me, which I think there's something fundamentally just a little bit off with my aim. But for whatever reason, I just don't score that many citadels against anything other than really lightly armored cruisers or ships that are very, very close to me. So it wasn't actually all that surprising looking back at this and seeing that with that Alaska we were not able to citadel it. Then we actually did a little bit more damage with HE. Your HE does do a lot of damage. It's just a little bit frustrating running around with 12-inch guns with this long reload, and yeah, If you do have to fight a lot of legendary ships, and you probably are, then you can walk away with stuff like that. It's not very good at all. Not very good at all. There are parts of legendary battleships where it doesn't seem like you can get through any of its armor. But for the most part, so far there's only 2 of them, but they have decent superstructures. In that case, another really tragic amount of damage. We do manage to start a fire. He returns fire, and another big hit with 16-inch guns. For the most part, you do get into this weird situation where if someone hits you for like 10,000 damage and they have 16-inch guns, you're almost kind of relieved because it could have been that much worse. Now, as we're making our turn here, I will note that you can see my aim drift a little bit there, and it drifts a little bit there because, of course, my turrets just can't keep up with how quickly the ship can turn. And that's saying a lot because I have a 920 meter turning circle, so you're really going to want to think about how much you want to play with that, and whether or not the speed of your reload is more important than whether or not you can get your guns on target in like a reasonable amount of time. Now, part of that is that I've chosen main battery in slot 4. If you choose range, your turrets will be quite a bit faster than this, or at least noticeably faster than this, but obviously that's going to hurt your DPM too. So, things to think about. In any case, we have managed to weather essentially 3 pretty decent shots, helped mostly by the fact that they were at range from 16-inch guns or larger. And you can see after we've used all of our heals, we're still sitting at 21,000 hit points. Not too bad. So the Azuma has a decent amount of survivability, but if you do drive this around broadside, you do really run the risk of getting blapped in the worst possible way. Now I'm moving in towards B, just because he's like a moth drawn to a flame. TacticAngel needs to capture bases, but we do manage to see some extra hit points floating around out there. And it does look like our team is going to be able to finish off the game pretty easily. We've got 2 ships left. There's a Cleveland, and not a real dangerous ship for me. It will do a lot of damage with HE, but its hit points are low enough. Hipper is, unfortunately, unless it gets really close to you, probably one of the least scary ships that you can face. That is a cruiser, because of course it has worse DPM than you with HE. You have at least enough armor to tank that. Now, obviously, if it sails within 6 kilometers, it's going to murder your face off, but that's just how German battleships and cruisers tend to work. So that guy's probably going to tuck behind the island. I do find that shooting AP at German battleships and German cruisers tends to be a little bit more effective than maybe with other nations. And I think that just might be because they have giant superstructures to hit, and you can actually penetrate those, and the shots get kind of trapped in there. But they might be the exception to what I typically shoot with AP versus HE. I imagine there's a good chance that the same thing would work for English ships, but you just don't see them all that often. In any case, if you're shooting a French battleship, probably want to stick to HE. If you're shooting an American battleship, it's probably angled well enough that you want to shoot HE. One of the problems you kind of run into with this ship is because you have such a long reload, it's really hard to exercise good shell selection, because by the time that they turn out or turn in or whatever, you don't have enough time to actually load up the shell that you really want. I guess like most things, you're not probably psychic enough. I'll just go ahead and go through my final thoughts about Azuma. All in all, I don't really want to trash the Azuma, and I will be trying to earn her through the campaign. I do think it is safe to say that this ship is not going to be for everyone, though. Particularly with how many legendary ships are out there right now, the Azuma stands a real good chance of being bottom tier in almost every game that she plays. And against legendary ships, you have to be very, very careful, pretty smart, and very intentional about what you're doing, or you're going to have a bad time. Though we don't have any legendary destroyers entering this game just yet, my bet is that shortly after people start finishing this campaign, that you'll really start to see some of those. And with just a plane, you don't really have a lot of versatility in dealing with those. So really the only ship that you can fight at legendary tier right now with any real effectiveness is the Alaska in any sort of fair fight. The battleships at that tier are going to look at your armor just like you're one giant destroyer with a citadel, and you're pretty poorly positioned to be able to actually hunt down the enemy destroyers, or even frankly defend yourself all that well, considering how slow your gun turrets are. For this reason, even though I did start to enjoy playing this ship more and more the longer I played it, and I do feel that this ship can help make you be a better player, I would caution against anybody who feels like they might struggle in relatively lightly armored cruisers, because there's a lot of circumstances where, in spite of how much this is like a battleship or a battle cruiser, you are just going to get torn apart. In any case, those are my general thoughts on the Azuma. I hope you have enjoyed this little review. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.